taking forever. So every month I make a video about the books I have read in the previous month. Reading is a very, very important thing to me. And I also make these videos to stay accountable and talk about what I have read over the month. And also I share the updates on a book I've been reading for the last couple of years. And I'll give you a hint. The update this month is a little bit gnarly with a fun story behind it. So anyway, let's get into the video. Let's talk about what I've read and what I thought about it, and you might want to pick some of these books up as well. It also wouldn't be a video of mine if I did not talk about how my office needed cleaning out and had to ungarhole it, but it's been a few videos since we had one of those moments. So let's talk about why my reading this month was a little bit different. And that's because I went on vacation to the beach. Vacation reading is one of my favorite types of reading. I absolutely love vacation reading. There's something about just sitting there all day long. I'm a homesteader, which means I will go out there 8 o'clock in the morning and I will stay until 5 o'clock or so. I want to stay out there all day long. And the only thing I actually finished this month were my vacation books. I'm going to walk through all of those. You can find links to all of these down there in the description of these. Now, these are Amazon affiliate links, but all that money either goes back to the channel or just pursuing the weird sort of things I end up talking about on the channel. So it's just one way for you to say, hey, Chad, I support the stuff that you're doing right now. So if you want to buy one of these books or buy anything else on Amazon, just click that link and go find it. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to want to separate these books out into a couple of different sections. Also, I posted something on Twitter before vacation about what types of books pastors like to read on vacation, and somebody said, Chad, you seriously need to consider reading some fiction. It wasn't even one of my categories. I actually bought 3 books this past weekend in New Orleans at an old bookshop. 2 of them are fiction. Well, one of them's fiction, one of them is poetry, and the other was a history of the city of New Orleans. By the way, went and saw Zayo for the first time in 20 years in New Orleans. It was awesome. Great concert. So my vacation reading really is kind of divided into two subsets of stuff. Both of them I'm really interested in. One of them makes a lot more sense to somebody who's a pastor. The other one might not make sense to someone who's a pastor. So the first thing I read was Alan Kreider's book, The Change of Conversion and the Origin of Christendom. Now, I love Alan Kreider. His book, The Patient Ferment of the Only Church, is an absolute banger of a book. Read that during COVID, the summer of 2020, and it really probably changed my perspective of ministry. Maybe for the last half, for the next half of what my career looks like. I love this book. This is simple, but what it really goes into is the idea that conversion was a really different thing. And a lot of times what we think about conversion in the 21st century, the 20th century, might not necessarily be the idea of conversion that lasted for those first, few hundred years of Christianity. And it goes deep into a lot of stuff. And what he really does, and this sounds almost like a megachurch mission statement of some sort, but he sorted conversion into 3 topics: belief, behavior, and belonging. And he traces this through early church father writing, through catechisms, through sermons, letters, all these things that we actually had this pretty documented over those first few hundred years of the church. But then he also begins to talk about how much the idea of conversion changed with the Edict of Constantine when Christianity became the official legal religion of the Roman Empire, and how that began changing the ways that people came into the church, but also the expectations for what does it mean to call yourself a Christian and to join the church. And all of it's done through those 3 mega church values of belief, belonging, and becoming. If you can't tell, if you've watched these previous videos, I feel like every month I'm reading something church fathers oriented. I feel like if you're in Christian leadership or just a follower of Jesus, I think reading the church fathers and reading about those first few hundred years of the church are incredibly important. So Alan Kreider, The Change of Conversion and the Origin of Christendom. I like this one a lot. The next book was by an evolutionary psychologist named Robin Dunbar. You might have heard of Dunbar's number, the idea of 150 being this specific grouping of people. But what Dunbar has also done is he actually found there's multiple layers to these ideas of the relationships that we live and that we have in life. There are 150, there's 50, there's 25, and there's 5. And this book on friends is all about those 5 and 15 or 25 layers. And I love Dunbar's logic. Now you might be saying, Chad, what's this whole evolution bit that's there? Well, he started off doing primate research. And I think that, I don't think you should be scared of this sort of stuff, because pretty much what he goes into is he's talking about humans this whole time, and this multiplicity level of studies they have found about relationships, about how relationships work different between men and women. What does it mean to be close to somebody? What does it mean to gain a friend? What does it mean to lose a friend? All these sorts of things. And I think this book, and I think Dunbar's whole idea of Dunbar's number is incredibly important for a discipleship conversation, but also for a church strategic design conversation, asking ourselves this question, hey, do we have enough spaces for people to have the relationships they need? If your church is between 50 and 150, and maybe you've been hitting that 110, 115 mark, this is kind of what I do for a living now. So this conversation, I can have it all day long. Sometimes what I've found, the biggest indicator of finding church growth is simply creating new spaces for people to meet new people. I've talked about this on Twitter before. I call it relational capacity and understanding, how are our churches actually designed to create relationships. I feel like if you're a discipleship person or a ministry design person in your church, I feel like reading this book would be incredibly interesting. It's a little thick. Talks about scientific research a lot. It's not so thick that you can't read it in a day and a half on the beach and still take notes on it. But I really recommend that. And now, so this is the second subset of books I read. And I'm finding myself interested in this broader topic. And I'm going to share one of the interesting points and the points of conclusion I am coming to at the end of it. But it's reading inside of military leadership and history. I'm over 40. There's the joke, once you turn 40, you either barbecue or you start reading about World War II. I do both, so I'm a complete stereotype. The first book was this, Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, The Mavericks Who Plotted Hitler's Defeat by Giles Milton. There's actually a movie that's on Amazon Prime right now that has, I think, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare might be the title. I watched it. It's actually about one of the stories in this book. But it's pretty much how William Churchill and the British military, the British government, and people slowly built up this ragtag group of people that operated in multiple ways all throughout the world in World War II, doing espionage, blowing up bridges. They stole a ship one time. That story's crazy. That's the one the movie's based about. But there's also an uphill battle. The military conventional leadership really hated these people because they felt like they were being ungentlemanly. They were doing things that good British people should not be doing. This was a great beach read. I actually passed it to my brother-in-law after I was done with it, and then he finished it too. Great little book. This is probably as close as I came to fiction this last year. Hopefully to rectify that. The next book I read, and I finished this a couple days after vacation. I wasn't able to get through. This was the last book I read during vacation. But it's called By Water Beneath the Waves by Benjamin Milligan. This is the history of the Navy SEALs. And I picked this up. You can see a note that I have on the front of it, something to write or something to think about. I picked this up because I was like, oh, sweet, a book of the history of the Navy SEALs. And it actually really wasn't a history of the Navy SEALs. It was a history of American special operations. What's so funny is these kind of actually talked about the same thing, and some of the same situations were brought up in both of them. And so it really started in World War II, went through Korea into Vietnam, and in Vietnam is really where you saw the Navy SEALs begin to discover what they meant. I picked it up because of my fifth book, and it's just an interesting point. But what I loved about it was hearing about how so many people in formal leadership did not want to have something that was highly adaptive, that was unorthodox, and where people cross boundaries, because that's the whole thing with the Navy SEALs. It's the Navy, but they primarily operate on land. So just seeing all those inner things came in. So the last book I have to read, I read this on vacation early on. I read an earlier book by these two authors a couple of months ago. I reread it actually, and it made it onto one of these videos. But this book is called The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, two Navy SEALs, about leadership lessons that they learned through multiple tours in Iraq during the most recent conflict. And while I might have marked up their first book, Extreme Ownership, a lot more than this book, I'll tell you, I actually think I liked this book better. I mean, I only have 10 book tabs in it and a couple of different larger sticky notes, but it goes deeper into these concepts, and it talks about the things and the ways they've seen more and more people, because they have a leadership consulting company that goes through these principles, the ways they saw this. But the ultimate idea of the dichotomy of leadership, and I saved this, I'm going to read this to you. This is what stuck out and made the most sense about the book to me. Jocko and Leif say that the principles of leadership are simple but not easy. That is the dichotomy that they're talking about. The whole book is about. It's simple but not easy. So how do you do the hard things that should be simple? I think Extreme Ownership, I think Dichotomy of Leadership are absolutely super important books for people in ministry to read, especially those that are learning how to be a leader, because you learn how to do it. Rarely are people naturally born into it. And like these whole three military history type things, what I found so interesting but also so encouraging about this is these things that we think are absolutely rock solid or absolutely well planned or well oiled or highly financed, all these sorts of things are absolutely not. And that 9 times out of 10, the people that make the biggest difference make multiple mistakes, but they're always iterating, they're always improving, they're always asking questions, and they're willing to kind of live outside of the realms of the norm. So I think I'm done with this topic for a while. I feel like I've read enough of these things, but it was fun to spend some time on vacation and knock out probably 800 pages or so, maybe even more than that, on this leadership principle history, military history. So every month when I make this video, I also talk about where I am reading Charles Taylor's tome of a book, Secular Age. And here's the thing, I actually did not read. I did not make any forward motion on this book this month. When we made the video, the last video at the end of June, I had read 423 pages, and I have 423 pages still marked here. But I told you an interesting story. I actually figured this out once I got home from vacation. I was like, I'm going to start powering through some extreme, through Charles Taylor some more. I brought on vacation, didn't read on vacation. And I realized, looking, I'm going to see if you can see this or not. My lighting might not be good for it. I realized I had a big, huge blank space in my book flags. And I was like, that's interesting. So I flipped back. I was like, where on earth is this 80-page section that I have I didn't flag anything. And then I realized, Chad, there's 80 pages that you completely skipped over, 2 whole chapters that you completely skipped over at some point in time in the last 6 months. And I realized if I want to read the whole thing, I got to read the whole thing. And so I've actually been going back, and I don't have a note of how many pages I've gone into it, probably 10, maybe 15, where this month I'm determined to catch up on those 2 chapters that I absolutely skipped over at some point in time, which makes sense because I try to read chapter to chapter in that book. So hopefully next month when we come back, I'm saying, hey, I actually have read 423 pages of this book instead of 330 or something like that. So I'm Chad Brooks. These are the books that I read this month. I started a bunch of stuff too. I'm excited about that. I'm hoping, I've already finished 2 books so far in August, so I know we got a couple books to share with you. Hoping to have a couple more stuff shared. I'm stoked about what August reading is going to be like because it's really, really different from what I have been reading. But with that, I'm Chad. Come hang out in the comments. That's one of my favorite things about YouTube is hanging out in the comments with people who watch the videos and are part of this community. I will see you back in the next video.